Lesson 7, Video 3. In this session, we're going to talk about crossing the chasm and building a success network. So what is a chasm? First, let's discuss it. A chasm is a valley, it's a gorge, it is a canyon, it is a trough that we're trying to get across. And so when we think about the picture of trying to get from, say, this point to some other destination, what are the perils and pitfalls that we may go through in trying to achieve? We're going to look at that here in a little bit. But before we do, let's talk a little about some work by Dr. Land. Grow or die, the unifying principle of transformation. What is it and what does that mean? When we think about our businesses and our environment, we go through a process. And because competition is always around us, we have to adapt, we have to modify, we have to maintain our relevancy in the marketplace. If we don't, then the market will determine whether we survive or not. So to characterize what Dr. Land has said into our context, let's talk about 3 phases of a living system, a life cycle. Now, in several places, you might find a product life cycle or a life cycle, or we might say anything that's organic goes through this phase. You go through a phase of being born, you will then grow, you mature, and then you die. That is a life cycle. But from a business perspective, and in this particular instance, we're going to talk about 3. We're going to talk about an entrepreneurial phase. It's that introduction into the marketplace and trying to figure out how to get it done. We're going to talk about repetition and growth, which leads us into a growth phase where we are able to repeat our processes and expand our markets. And then we're going to have an obsolete time, a period of obsolescence where we no longer have the market and we see things are kind of in a downward trajectory. Then what do we do about it? So as we start to think about each of these phases, let's talk about the entrepreneurial one. Here's a list of things that are part of the thinking processes in the entrepreneurial phase. We're not going to talk about every one of them, but I think a couple of key things here need to be called out. It's about the experimentation and the modifications that we have to go through, the adaptation to the market. We have to think outside the box. We have to be trying to understand what it is the market is really trying to get. We have to adapt. We have to be tactical. So how do we know if we're being successful in this phase? It's about acceptance. Did somebody think we had a good idea in trying to solve their problem? If we start to get those kinds of feedbacks and they're buying our product or service, then we're on the right track. The next phase deals with repetition and growth. And here we have different types of skills that are required. It's about our ability to manage and to come up with repeatable processes. Because truly, we have to start to think about cost optimizations, we have to think about profitability, and we have to think about expansion. And in order for us to do that, requires a different type of thinking and skill. As an entrepreneur, you're solving a problem. In a growth phase, you're thinking about business skills, and it deals with the management aspects. It's important, though, to understand why is it critical to be open-minded and teachable. Too many times, entrepreneurs come in with the idea and a limited skill set from a business perspective, and if they don't allow themselves to be taught or to be coached, then they could only grow as big as their capabilities are. And in order for most entrepreneurs, that is going to be a much shallower space than if they were able to get some professional help or from people that have experiences in dealing with size and growth. Remember, a few weeks back, we identified there were 2 types of mindsets. You could have a growth mindset or you could have a fixed. If you're having it fixed, then you're not going to succeed in this particular space. It's about being receptive to new ideas or different ways of doing things. The obsolescence phase means that we're in a slowdown, and unfortunately, we may not have been listening. We refuse to acknowledge the changes that are around us. There's a wonderful little book called Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson, and I highly recommend you get a copy of this. Not to steal the story, but to just give you a quick synopsis. It's about a couple of mice that are living fat with a stockpile of cheese, and one day they wake up and realize that all the cheese is gone. Hence, who moved my cheese, and what are they going to do about it? Nothing fails like success, from Dr. Land again. I think that's a point we need to consider, and I think we'll be looking at that later. I am not claiming to be an artist, so this is a very sketchy rendering, but I wanted you to give a graphic again about the life cycle aspect. Because when the entrepreneurial phase is in effect, we're basically testing the water, trying to figure it out and get it right. When we finally have something that is acceptable to the marketplace, we can then start to focus on growth and the expansion. But as with most life cycles, we reach a point of maturity and it flattens out onto a plateau, and then we'll start to tail off into obsolescence. Notice, though, that we have a sort of a reality check that basically says either if I don't do anything, I am going to continue in this downward path, or if I start to rethink about what I'm doing and reinvent myself and my process, I have the opportunity to get back into the game and end up back into a new growth phase. We also want to discuss the concept of building your success network. And I think it's a fair statement to say it's not what you know, it's who you know. No one in today's world can be expected to know everything there is to know. Not even Dr. Google can go ahead and give you answers to everything. But the thing is, there are people around that have experiences that can help you connect and help you learn as you're going. That is the reality. And in the expression, what is you cannot expect to get married on the first date, I kind of chuckle at this because what I think has to be accepted is the idea that you're not necessarily going to get it right the very first time. You have to test, you have to experiment, you have to try different things. And then when you finally find the winning formula, you can then start your process. Let's not also forget the idea of paying it forward. If others are willing to invest their time in you, do you think we have the obligation or responsibility to do the same for the next generation coming? David Petit was very gracious in his ability or his acceptance to respond back to someone who sends him an email and have a talk, share his learnings, give him some coaching. Or Scudamore, thinking with his MBA, he created the list of people that he could go to, and similarly he is on other people's lists. But it's about the learning and it's about the sharing of information. And Rodney had an interesting point about you can't do it yourself. I learned many years ago that in order to either get through from one place to another, you can only knock on the door, you can't bust your way in. Someone on the other side has to open it and give you a helping hand to come through or a welcome. Let's go to discussion.